I'm already calculating. Let me get situated here real quickly. Well, good morning. It's so good to be here with all of you. It was somewhat of seemed like a homecoming when I walked in. You know, I also coach my son's baseball team. And so we had a baseball game, a doubleheader last night. It was freezing back in Silver City, so we didn't get done till 10 p.m. So it was a late night, early morning start to the day. But I'm grateful to be here because I for sure didn't want to miss. I wanted to be here to be a part of this because this, in many ways, is an area where I got my start when we're talking about public service and what that means across the state of New Mexico for me personally and for each one of us. But before I get into that, I do want to share just a few things. I am extremely grateful that we started off with the acknowledgement of taking a breath, centering ourselves, getting us into a position where we're going to be open and receptive to new opportunities, new thoughts, new ideas, new networking. This is what makes us as New Mexicans. And I am particularly pleased and grateful that we have the acknowledgement of our tribal communities and the acknowledgement of what that means for all the diversity that we have across the state of New Mexico. You know, at a time where we see diversity, equity, inclusion, that has all of a sudden become bad terms, this is an opportunity for us to push even harder, to make sure that we recognize that that is where our strength is at, in our diversity. The whole meaning of our Zia symbol of our flag is recognizing the opportunities that we have with equality and inclusion. So I'm glad that we started off in that way. And I want to share a little bit of a story with you. Some of you may have heard why this is particularly important, why it relates to what we're doing today, and what this means to each one of us. You know, I was introduced as Gov Morales. But many of you may not know that that's not my name. Some people think it's Howard, some people think it's Hank, but my name was, at birth, Henry. And I was named after my father, who he also was not named Henry. But the reason how he came about was because my little cousin, about 6 months older than me, she couldn't pronounce the name Henry, and it came out as Howie, and I appreciate that, especially when you're on a ballot and you have a unique name that's a pro football player and a comedian, and I'm kind of in between, I would think. You know, I was proud to have been named Henry. But my father's name not being Henry, his name was Enrique. But in the school systems, what happened is that they changed many of the cultures. They didn't allow you to speak Spanish. They didn't allow you to speak in sometimes some of our tribal languages. And they changed it, so his name went from Enrique to Henry. But I was pleased to see that not only did my father get an opportunity before he passed away in 2019, that he saw the birth of the son that I coached the baseball game with last night. He saw the birth of my son to the name of Enrique, giving us full circle. But it doesn't end there. And I think when we look and see the impact of what takes place across our state, you know, I come from Silver City, southwest part of the state, mining community. And in that area, it's well known for its labor organizations and the work that labor does in promoting the opportunity for unity. The Salt of the Earth, many of you may recognize that that was the first blacklisted movie in Hollywood. And when that movie was blacklisted, it was because it was showing the power of labor coming together. And when labor came together, the men went and picketed for fair wages, safer working environments, and the opportunity to make sure that they were contributing members to, at the time, the mines that were there. Well, the powers that be brought in the police force. They put them into jail and saying, we're done with it, the strike is over, we can now move forward. But what they didn't recognize was what the power of Salt of the Earth meant. And the power of what we see in many of you here today is the power of women. And because what happened back then in my hometown, in my area, in the copper zinc mining strike, was that when the men were put in jail, it was the women who picked up the children, walked over to the picket line, and continued the dream to make sure that the legacy was going to be in place and to make sure that the promises for every one of those miners, for those safe working environments, better wages, was going to continue. So I have tremendous respect when we talk about honoring our tribal communities, talk about honoring those areas that are so important to us, that we also recognize what I see in many of our health councils across the state is the leadership that women show. As a proud father of a daughter, who also's name is Elena, after my mother, who was named Elena, but in school was changed to Helen. She too was proud to see her granddaughter born to her name. And I share that because by opening up as you did, bringing us together with the recognition that our strength is in being together. Our strength is in collaboration, and our strength is in the opportunity to continue to be an example across the whole country of what we do right here in the state of New Mexico, and I'm so proud of that. I want to say on behalf of Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham, our entire cabinet, all of our state agencies, how grateful that we are to be here today and to be of support. Because truly the work that you do, as I shared earlier, why this is near and dear to me, is because this is where I got my start. I was a high school teacher, proud teacher. I was a baseball coach. And because I was a baseball coach, I was brought on to be part of my first community service project, if you will, as a professional. I was brought on as the Grant County Community Health Council community activity sector. Anybody here from the Grant County Health Council today? I know we have Karen over there, Karen right there from Grant County. All the individuals who are representing every sector within the health councils, that had an impact on me because that was my first introduction to the opportunities of seeing what community collaboration could mean. From healthcare to recreation to environmental opportunities for improvement. I got an opportunity and I got that drive and that excitement to say, I want to do more. So it wasn't long after that that I ran for county clerk, and I'm so grateful. But as I talk about that and shared a little bit of my story, I want to get a little bit more on why it is that it's important also to be here today. And it's important to also to recognize that anything that we do as an executive, and I want to stress this, because a lot of times you hear the division that happens, especially in Washington. And I have to say that even though we have disagreements in the state of New Mexico, I'm extremely proud to say that we can work across the aisles. We can work together to make sure that we're going to do all that we can to help promote the state of New Mexico. And that's what you as a collaborative council demonstrate in our example too. So I want to take a moment, and I truly mean this because I've been on that side with the three branches of government. I've been fortunate to be part of the legislative process as well as the executive side. I would ask that all of our legislators who are here today, please stand and please be recognized. And thank you for being such great partners. If you're not able to stand, please wave, because I want to make sure that you are recognized for the work that you do. I appreciate that, and I truly do appreciate the collaborative work that we have, because we can definitely get into existence where there's lines that are drawn, and we're never going to make any progress. Well, you've seen what we've been able to do in the state of New Mexico. You heard about the impact of early childhood education and how that's a bipartisan approach of what successes that we can have. I'd also like to take a moment to recognize Val, our executive director, and the work that she does. It's amazing. The tenacity, the passion, the continued effort that she does to work on your behalf every single day. Big round of applause for Val, and thank you for your tireless efforts. She is a tremendous example of what one person can do and the impact that can be made if you put your corazón into it. And you, Val, always have put your corazón into making sure health councils are properly treated, properly funded, and properly promoted. So thank you again, Val, for all the work that you do. So when we talk about that historic, again, the power of the purse lies in the legislature. And the legislature used their power, in my opinion, for the great improvements in the state of New Mexico. $4 million investment. $4 million investment. Is that the largest investment in health councils that we know to date? I believe so. That deserves a big round of applause. Thank you, legislators, for putting that in the budget. This is a result of advocating. This is a result of seeing the vision of what that means to ensure that even through the difficult times, because I saw, as a senator, when we were at 0% reserve, I saw when we had to cut budgets all across. And I saw the impact that it had that we're still, as a state, dealing with. And not all health councils were able to survive. Not all health councils were able to make it because the funding was so minimal. But because the advocacy that you've done, today is a new day. Today is an opportunity that we have to continue to invest in what I believe is preventative measures. We can talk about all the back end issues that we deal with, crime. We deal with homelessness. When we deal with many of our issues like substance abuse, if we invest, continue to invest like we just did, this $4 million, you work on it on the front end, the investment pays off multiple ways. And that's why it's so motivating to be here. And when we talk about that, I do want to share, and I don't see any of my Senate colleagues here. Do I have any of my senators who are here with me today? I don't see any of them. Well, okay, so they won't be so mad at me. Oh, maybe so. Because I wasn't too pleased on an amendment that was put in on the Senate that really directed a lot of that focus that was going to be directly on mental health, which absolutely is important to make sure that we recognize that. But I also believe in the power of each individual community having the creativity, having the way to get the opportunities to meet the goals that we do without being so prescriptive and saying it has to be spent a certain way. So I trust that you're going to continue to be creative. I trust you're going to be able to use those dollars in a way that's going to meet the need for every community, which is unique in its own right. But I also want to make sure that we recognize that, yeah, mental health, behavioral health is absolutely important. And I want to thank Nick Bucas for the leadership that you give and you provide. Thank you for always being available and the work that you do on behalf of those services for mental health and behavioral health. But I do want to share just a few things that are concerning to me. And I want to share that simply because we see the winds that are blowing. And we see the impact that takes place just in my home community where my kids go to school. A $6 million grant that they received a letter that was specifically on mental health and was specifically there for wellness, for the services that are needed. When you talk about education, it's just not the mental side of it. It's just not the academic piece. We all know that it's mentally, physically, spiritually, emotionally, socially that add to that component. So when my superintendent of my local school district gets a letter saying we are canceling the remainder of that grant, not only are 18 employees affected, so are the wellness rooms. So are the opportunities for outlets for students and what they so much need. And even at times, 3 times to be specific, when a weapon was brought on campus, but because of the wellness rooms, the opportunity to make sure that we thwarted what could have been a devastating act. We saw that, the impact that takes place. So these are the winds that are blowing when we talk about what's happening in Washington is a concern. And I'm not being political whatsoever. I'm being realistic when we talk about these cuts that are happening to much needed areas across our state. We're talking 1.5 trillion of essential programs. We're talking about 880 billion in cuts to Medicaid. What a tremendous impact that would have in a negative way for our state. And I think that what we hold so near and dear, innovation, discovery, and opportunity, is truly at risk. And it's going to take every single one of us, legislators, whether you're Democrat or Republican, people in the community, whether you're from the northern part, the southern part, or tribal communities, that we band together. Because without our voice and our advocacy, we can talk that we're trying to balance the budget, but the reality of it is, when you're trying to balance the budget at the expense of programs that are truly making a difference, you're never going to balance a budget. You're never going to address the deficit that is there. In fact, many of us remember we created a bigger deficit when we dismantled our behavioral health system across the state. So I want to make sure that we recognize and to band together as New Mexicans to ask and to advocate that the National Institute of Health, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, biomedical research, combating infectious diseases, all these areas that unfortunately are under scrutiny and possibly set for cuts. We cannot afford that, not with the progress that we've made. Fortunately, because in the state we have tremendous revenue and surpluses that primarily come from oil and gas. And I mentioned that coming from a community where there's copper in the extractive industries, we now have 100% reserves. 100% reserves. You're going to hear that there's 30% reserves, and which is extremely healthy compared to the 0% that we had. But you're going to hear that we're at 30% reserves. But I was on the finance committee, so I know where money's tucked away. And I know all the wonderful funds that the legislators have set up. Funds that started, for example, with $330 million for early childhood education has now bloomed to $10 billion. Funds that we have in other areas that are going to continue to grow. So when you hear we have 30% reserves, we have 100% reserves, if not more. Now's the time to invest, and we're able to withstand some of the impacts that are taking place with these potential cuts from the federal government, but we can't do it forever. We need the federal government to be partners with us. We need to make sure that we're working together and that we are coming in to safeguard every single one of those programs. I hope in your discussions today that you guys will have an opportunity to see how we can collaborate with the power of our collaborative health councils and the power that you bring together to ensure that we let not only our congressional staff know, but to let the executive staff know in DC that these are vital to the overall health of the state of New Mexico. We can do that. We can do that. And in closing, I want to share, as I had spoke a little bit about the things that are important to every one of us. What you're doing is an act of service. What you're doing is an act of compassion. What you're doing every single day, whether it's environment and education, whether it's in other areas that are near and dear to you, you're providing that support. And there's no greater purpose than providing service to others. Some of you may have heard me share this story, but I want to share it again. And the story goes as a teenager walks into a gas station. And when he walked into that gas station, he sees an older, frail gentleman who is there mopping the floor. And the teenager says, "Hey, what would you say if I told you that I keep having your boots in my dreams?" The wiser older gentleman said, "I would say it's time you wake up. You can go through a whole lifetime living through a dream." The teenager comes back and says, "Hey, Socrates, if you're so wise, why are you working in a gas station?" The gentleman came back and said, "I work in a service station, and there is no higher purpose." And the teenager says, "Then pumping gas?" And the gentleman says, "Service to others." That is who we are as New Mexicans. That is what you do every single day, not only in your role with community and tribal health councils. That is what you do as members of your community, as members of your family, members of your businesses or nonprofits. There is no higher purpose than providing service to others. I want to say on behalf of the state of New Mexico, thank you for providing that service and doing it with so much kindness, compassion, love, and honoring our diversity, the equity opportunities, and the innovative possibilities that we have with inclusion. Have a wonderful rest of the conference. I apologize I can't stay. I'm going to be driving up, have a meeting here right afterwards, and then I'll be driving up to Espanola, and then we'll be doing a military education program as well this evening. But I want to say thank you for making the trip and being here. God bless you all.